A wealthy man sits in a vast estate with every comfort imaginable. Then, without warning, he pivots and walks into the desert with nothing. He traded his silks for the rags of a wandering ascetic, becoming known as Katkata Baba. He would spend the rest of his life as a man with no possessions. This wasn't a slow retreat from the world or a forced bankruptcy. His entire social and financial standing remained intact until the moment he chose to walk away. The catalyst was a simple folktale about a queen and her maid. He heard the ending of the story, and his attachment to his riches vanished. The logic within this specific story works like a trap. It takes a basic observation about the cost of comfort and scales it until a life of luxury looks less like a privilege and more like a looming sentence. To understand how a few sentences can strip a man of his desire for power, we have to look at the cold internal math of that story. The story begins with a maid who spends every day preparing the queen's lavish bed, straightening silk sheets and applying rare perfumes. She is exhausted by the labor required to maintain someone else's comfort. One day, feeling a cool breeze and overwhelmed by fatigue, she lies down on the royal bed just to see how it feels. Within seconds, she is in a deep sleep. The queen enters and finds her servant asleep on the royal silks. To the monarch, this isn't just a lapse in duty, it is a violation of the boundary between ruler and servant. The queen orders a punishment meant to re-establish that boundary, 60 lashes with a whip. At this point, the story follows the typical path of a tragedy. It illustrates a world where power is absolute, and the consequences for the poor are immediate and physical. As the whipping begins, the maid screams in pain, begging for a mercy the queen refuses to grant. Then the screams stop. In their place, the maid begins to laugh. The queen is baffled. The laughter strips the punishment of its intended effect. She demands to know how someone being whipped can find anything to laugh about. The maid points to the scale of her transgression. A few minutes of rest cost 60 lashes. She then asks the queen to calculate her own life. Sleeping on that bed every night, the queen's accrued debt will eventually number in the millions. The maid was laughing because her suffering had a clear, finite end. She realized the queen's debt, by the same logic, was becoming impossible to pay. This was the moment Sapu Sahab heard the story's conclusion while sitting in his own palace. He realized the story wasn't about a fictional monarch. It was a description of his own life. He was the one sleeping on the perfumed bed while others labored. He calculated the cost of his own daily comforts. Every night of effortless sleep became a new line item in a spiritual ledger he couldn't balance. He left his estate because he saw his wealth as a mounting debt. In his mind, walking into the desert wasn't a sacrifice. It was an escape from a future he could no longer afford. This story uses a tool called cognitive reframing. By shifting the focus from the immediate physical pain to the long-term mathematical debt, the maid changed her status. She was no longer a victim. She was the only one in the room whose debt was being settled. It forces us to look at our own modern conveniences and wonder what the hidden price tag might be. If every comfort has a corresponding cost, we have to ask which of our luxuries we are actually willing to pay for. Change doesn't always require a lifetime of effort. Sometimes it only takes a single calculation that makes your current way of living feel impossible to continue.